start. However, due to the extreme traffic, it took over an hour for people to get here from Brooklyn and from other places, so please bear with us. Would like to thank those that are joining us virtually as well, from all over the world, at this Makom Kodesh, the Dalet Amos of the Oil of the Rebbe. Special thanks to the Lubavitch Youth Organization, Tziri Agudas Chabad, for yet again putting together such a meaningful program. Special thanks to Rabbi Shmuel Butman for standing behind this event year after year to make sure that we are inspired. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's event, marking the 27th yahrtzeit anniversary of the physical passing of our dear Rebbe on the 3rd of Tammuz, 1994. My name is Rabbi Yossi Blusovsky, and together with my wife, I direct Chabad of Northeast Queens in Bayside. I stand here tonight representing my colleagues, the Shluchim, emissaries of the Rebbe throughout New York and beyond. 27 years have passed since the Rebbe's physical presence left us, and the pain has not abated, while the massive void that we feel every single day, not seeing the holy countenance of the Rebbe and his warm and comforting smile, and not hearing his powerful and reassuring voice addressing every pertinent issue, that void is unfilled. But the message is clear: onward and upward. We are here tonight to join together for an evening of connection and inspiration, a Farbrengen, a meeting of souls, an evening of tribute. Our goal is to come away with a rejuvenated sense of purpose and to pledge to continue and strengthen the mission given to us by the Rebbe to spread the light of Torah and mitzvahs and Chassidus to all. Generally, on a yahrtzeit, we reflect on the lifetime of the person and their accomplishments. We focus on the past. With the Rebbe, we focus on the present and the future. As the Holy Zohar teaches us that a tzaddik is more present after his passing than while he was still physically alive. Yatir mibechayohi. We are now entering into the 28th year since Gimel Tammuz. 28 in Hebrew is koyach, strength and power. It is truly amazing how so many years after Gimel Tammuz, we see the ever-growing influence and koyach of the Rebbe. You might have seen or heard about the latest Pew report. This is a report on the current state of American Jewry. In the report, there is an incredible statistic. 38% of American Jews responded that they have engaged with Chabad. Now, the exact number of Jews in America is unclear. Anywhere from 5.7 million to 7.6 million. But taking a lowball figure, 6 million, 38% means that 2.3 million Jews have engaged with Chabad. Engaged means that the Rebbe has kindled their souls. The Moses, the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation, through his awesome influence, through his shluchim and chassidim, has lit the candle of Judaism within 2.3 million American Jews. And I would say the number is higher, and that is just in America. If that is not koyach, I don't know what is. However, we cannot be satisfied. We have not yet crossed the finish line. The Rebbe's ultimate vision was for world peace and the revelation of Hashem in our world through the coming of Mashiach. Let us plead with Almighty God that He send us Mashiach and reunite us with the Rebbe and all the righteous of our people and all of our loved ones. This should be the last yahrtzeit that we have to commemorate in Golus and exile. Amen. The reason that this venue was chosen for this event is due to its proximity to the Rebbe's Ohel, to the Rebbe's resting place. Please take a few minutes tonight. There are rabbis and rabbinical students here to help and write a pidyon nefesh, a special note. Spend some time at the Ohel, daven for whatever you need, and be sure to pledge to upgrade your Jewish engagement as well. To continue the Farbrengen, we call upon someone who needs no introduction, Rabbi Friedman. Has been a shliach for 50 years. He is the founder of the first yeshiva for women and girls who look to re-engage and rediscover, some for the first time, their Judaism late in life. He is the author of numerous bestsellers on Jewish spirituality and relationships. He is a speaker who, with his wit and wisdom, has mesmerized audiences throughout the globe. The rabbi will address the Rebbe's vision and inspirational impact. Without any further ado, Rabbi Friedman.
There were a number of books recently published about the Rebbe. Many pages to each of them, big books, and it still doesn't describe the Rebbe. So whatever we say about the Rebbe tonight is just one person's perspective, one angle, one aspect. There's always, always more. We're just beginning to see the Rebbe's wisdom, his foresight, his brilliance, and his devotion. One of the ways to appreciate the Rebbe is something that is very common now on the internet. If you want to speak on the internet, you have to unmute. In 1950, the Jewish community all over the world was on mute. We had no voice. We were afraid to speak. We were afraid to tell the truth. Like that joke about the Jews who came over to Ellis Island and somebody asked, "How old are you?" And they look at each other like, what should we say? Because you never told the truth in Europe. So somebody said to him, "Tell them the truth, it's America." We didn't know how to tell the truth. We didn't think anybody wanted to hear from us. We didn't think that anything we had to say was important or relevant. We were on mute. The Rebbe changed that. The Rebbe unmuted the Jewish world. He gave us back a voice. He refused to accept victim status. We're not victims, we are heroes. We are capable of changing the world. And as a teenager, growing up here in Crown Heights, It was so exciting. The world, the Jewish world, was so negative, so in mourning, convinced that this is the last gasp and that Judaism is not going to make it for past another 10 years. My grandfather asked me when I was a teenager, can you at least promise me that you'll keep Shabbos? He didn't think there would be more than that. That was like asking a lot because it was over. Everybody was so pessimistic. Everybody was so defeated. And then you walk on Kingston Avenue on Eastern Parkway, and the place is alive. All hours of the night. Singing, dancing. What is this? For teenagers, it was so exciting. It was so challenging. It was so irresistible. Just a quick story. I'm talking to a guy who has a radio show in Montreal. And there were those years when the Rebbe would farbrengen, and his farbrengen would be, I don't know what to call it even, beamed up to a satellite and beamed back down. It wasn't cable television. It certainly wasn't network television. It was satellite communication, cutting edge. So this guy in the radio show, he was interviewing me, but he starts telling me a story. He says, I was playing with the remote control, and all of a sudden I see this rabbi. I couldn't I couldn't change it. I sat there mesmerized, and I started to cry. I said, why were you crying? It was a farbrengen. It was a happy occasion. Why were you crying? He says, because for the first time in my life, I saw a Jew who was totally comfortable in his skin. Can you imagine how stressful the world was for the Jews at that time? Nobody was comfortable in their skin. Nobody had a voice. We didn't know where we belonged. The Rebbe gave us a voice. He said, where do we belong? Who are we in the world? We are a light to the nations. We stood at Har Sinai, we received the Torah, and we are going to fix the world. And everybody looked at each other, we're going to what? And look, everywhere in the world, if you see a little enthusiastic Judaism, you know that Rebbe was behind it. Everywhere in the world. But I want to tell you a little more of a personal experience. I couldn't wait to leave yeshiva because there was so much to do. It was so exciting. People were doing amazing things, Chabad houses. Finally, after we were married, I asked the Rebbe where I should go, and the Rebbe chose Minnesota. Minnesota. The shliach who was already there came to Brooklyn looking for somebody to help him out. And he brought these beautiful 8x10 pictures of his activities and his Chabad house, and they were all taken in the summer. I had no idea. My father spent some time in Siberia. I didn't know that the weather in Minnesota comes directly from Siberia. It caught up with me. But anyway, the Rebbe chose Minnesota. We came to Minnesota, we started this program called Beis Chana, a crash course on Judaism for women. Because there were yeshivas for men starting as adults in their Jewish education, but there was nothing for women. So we figured, what the heck, let's start something for women. And this is like the early 70s, when the country was crazy. It was like the leftovers of the 60s It was wild. It was crazy times. So we didn't ask anybody. We didn't do any research. Nothing. We said, let's make a place for women. We sent out flyers to campuses in the Midwest. Come. We had no plan. We had nothing. 18 women showed up. And we thought, they'll do a little sightseeing in the morning. They'll do a little shopping in the afternoon. And in the evening, we'll have a class for an hour or two and we'll learn something. These women walked in military boots. They were the radical students of the 60s who were frustrated that they weren't able to stop the Vietnam War, and they tried to change campuses, burn down campuses. These were the chevre. They were not going to go shopping, and they were not going to go sightseeing. They wanted answers. It turned out that I end up teaching, which I didn't plan on doing, morning to morning. We would start 9 o'clock in the morning and we would sit until 8 o'clock in the morning. Night after night, day after day, they wouldn't stop. They wanted answers. And mainly they wanted an answer to the question of what is the purpose of life? They wanted to get right to the heavy duty, right? The next year, without advertising, the next summer, 42 women show up. We just figured, this is good, let's make a winter program. 102 women show up. And it's been going on ever since. But we really didn't know what we were doing. One woman came in the early 70s. She was sitting in class. The air conditioner was blowing like here, but she was sweating. Every class, she would sit there and sweat, and the room is cold. I had no idea. She was having withdrawal symptoms. She was an alcoholic. And she came to the program determined to stop drinking. But as she was sitting there, she was going through withdrawal symptoms. So it lasted about 10 days, and then she couldn't do it anymore, and she went out and got drunk. She came back and was so upset with herself that she slit her wrists. Sitting in the hallway, luckily somebody happened to walk by, and we rushed her off to the hospital, and she was okay. But now we realized we are so irresponsible. Do we have insurance? Are we supposed to have insurance? What if somebody got sick from the food we fed them? And all of a sudden, all these legal issues that we never even thought of. And then we had the question of, what should we do? This woman wanted to stay and become observant, and her family back home was not observant. What do we do? Send her home? Keep her here? What do we do? We call the Rebbe's office. And we dictate the whole story. And within an hour, we get an answer from the Rebbe. The answer was, Shayach lehoireha. This pertains to her parents. We took that to mean send her home. So I go to the hospital, where she was still recovering, and I said, we're going to get you a ticket and you'll go home after you're ready to leave the hospital. She says, I can't go home. So why not? My parents are survivors. They're elderly. My father is very frail, and he doesn't know that I have this problem. I can't shock him like this. He thinks I'm the angel in the family. I thought maybe she's exaggerating. I called the Chabad house in her town, and I said, do you know this family? The rabbi says, yes. I said, here's the problem. The daughter, whatever, can you tell the father that his daughter is coming home? He said, I'm not going to tell him. He's frail. I said, oh. So she's right. So, write to the Rebbe. Can't send her home because her father doesn't know and he'll dangerous to. We call the Rebbe's office for an answer, and we're talking to the Rebbe's Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's secretary, and the Rebbe picks up the extension. And we're telling Rabbi Chadakov that she can't go home because her father doesn't know. The Rebbe says on the phone, 8 years and the father doesn't know? So we tried to explain. She stayed away, she stayed over, she kept it from him. And the Rebbe says, 8 years and the father doesn't know? I say, okay, we got the message. I go back to the hospital, I give her a dime, that's what it costs to make a long distance phone call. I say, call your father and tell him you're coming home. This is directly from the Rebbe. She goes off to the phone booth, and I'm standing and talking to her psychiatrist. 15 minutes later, she comes back, and she's beaming. She's shining. The psychiatrist was like, whoa, what is this? She says, he knew. He knew. She was 50% cured. She called her father, said that she has this problem, and her father said, I know, but I don't know how to handle this. I don't know. If the rabbis in Minnesota will take care of you, I'll cover all the bills, stay there and get well. So she stayed. I went to pick her up when she was ready to be discharged. And again, I'm talking to the psychiatrist. And he says, at our last session, she remembered the first time she got drunk. She was 14. At a friend's house. At some point during the night, she said, I'm going home. And the friend said, don't go home like this. Sleep over and you'll go home when you're sober. She insisted on going home. She comes home, she lets herself in the front door, and she trips. This is how she's telling the story. She tripped on the metal umbrella stand in the hallway. It fell on the tile floors, made a huge racket, woke her parents up. The psychiatrist said to her, you tripped? And she thought for a moment and she said, no, I kicked it over. I wanted my parents to know that I was in trouble. The parents came to the top of the stairs, looked down at her and saw that she was okay, and they went back to sleep. And that's why she was convinced that her parents don't know. Now we realized that we hadn't understood the Rebbe's answer. When we first wrote in, the Rebbe said it pertains to her parents, not send her home. The problem is between her and the parents. So we call the Rebbe back and say she can't go home. The father doesn't know. So the Rebbe says the father doesn't know. Isn't that the problem? 8 years she's suffering alone and her father doesn't know? When she made that phone call and discovered that her father did know, that was it. Her problem was 90% solved. She stayed a year in Minnesota. She eventually went home, she got married, and she's at Rebbitzin. The moral of the story is not only that we got to really hear what the Rebbe says, and that the Rebbe is, available all the time for any Jew, no matter what the problem and so on. The moral of the story is this is true of everybody. Almost every one of our aches and pains, our worries, our anxieties, our depressions, is because we think that our Father doesn't know. It's not good. To think that your Father doesn't know undermines your health. It undermines your place in the world, your mission, your purpose, everything. The Rebbe's message was, what do you mean a father doesn't know? Of course your Father knows. There's nothing that the Rebbe didn't take personally, take seriously. No individual, no problem, no issue that the Rebbe didn't relate to, that the Rebbe didn't empathize with, a word that Rebbe used himself. And the message is, your Father in heaven knows. He knows, and that means he cares. So what are you worried about? What are you worried about? Our Father knows. And anyone who comes here to the oil will tell you, not only do their problems get solved miraculously, they feel like someone is listening. Somebody knows their problem. Somebody understands their pain. They're not alone. And that itself is such a blessing. So take advantage of your visit here. Speak to the Rebbe. He wants to hear from you. He is very much present, very much involved, as concerned today with earth, with what's going on here, as he was during his entire life. And heaven, not so interesting to him. He'd much rather hear about what's happening here. Is the world getting better? Are we bringing Mashiach? Is God becoming more real to the world? Are we bringing the Shekhinah down to earth? That's what he wants to know. What's happening in heaven, not his concern. His pleasure is to hear that you're doing another mitzvah. His pleasure is to hear that you're now a proud, comfortable Jew, unmuted. Don't be muted. Find your voice and use it, and blame it on the Rebbe.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Friedman, for your amazing words. For our next speaker, I have the honor of introducing a colleague, one of the Chashavei Rabbanim, one of the prominent rabbis in Queens. Rabbi Moshe Taub is the rabbi of the Young Israel of Holliswood, which in my estimation is the closest shul to the Ohel. He also serves as rabbinic editor at Ami magazine. Thousands of people await his articles eagerly every week. And he also, I don't know how he manages, but he also serves as the Menahel, the director of the Mechina, the high school at Telz in Riverdale. Rabbi Moshe Taub will share his perspective on Gimel Tammuz and the Rebbe.
What a kavod. Really, what an honor. I'm just going to share for a few moments a few divrei chizuk on this auspicious occasion. You know, Chazal tell us that in every generation there are how many tzaddikim? I'm asking the audience. How many? 36 Lamed Vav tzaddikim. And there's actually a rumor that they're hidden tzaddikim, although, by the way, I don't know any makar, any source, that they're hidden. Some of us are such hidden tzaddikim, even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even Hashem doesn't know. But that being said, in every generation there are 36 tzaddikim. And among those tzaddikim, there are the vast majority that we look at those tzaddikim and we're so humbled. And we look at them and we recognize what this person has become. What a human being could be. A true Tselem Elokim. That's the vast majority of tzaddikim. But there are some tzaddikim among the Lamed Vavniks in every single dar that it's not about us looking at them and recognizing what they became. But when they look at us, we recognize what we can become. And that was Harav HaGoyin Reb Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Zecher Tzadik v'Kodesh Livrocha. Anybody who has ever come into contact with him, it wasn't just a kinna seifrim, look at this gadol. When he looked at you, you looked inside yourself. So I want to share just one story tonight. I'm going to be very brief. Imagine you're 19 years old. Maisa shahoya kachoya. This is the story. A 19-year-old boy who fell in love with mathematics. And he was accepted on scholarship to Yale University. And he calls his professor and he tells his professor, look, I want to talk and learning with you in mathematics on the way to Princeton every day. Could I join your carpool? He said, you could join my carpool, but you probably will not want to talk to me about mathematics. He didn't know why. The first day, the old station wagon passes by the dormitory. The 19-year-old, Paul Rosenblum was his name. He steps into the car and he realizes exactly why he couldn't talk about mathematics. He sat in the back seat because in the front passenger seat sat Albert Einstein. So he was quiet. He was quiet and he listened and he was nispayel and he was inspired and he was galvanized and it just wanted him to make him learn more and more mathematics. And he was so successful, Paul Charles Rosenblum, that he went on to become a professor in Stanford and then the University of Missouri. And at the University of Missouri, Professor Rosenblum met a Dr. Feller. Now, some of the Lubavitchers in the room may know where I'm going with this story. Dr. Feller, she was an amazing professor of mathematics herself, and her husband, I believe, was one of the first shluchim from the Rebbe, if I'm not mistaken. And he didn't know from Shabbos, he didn't know from tzitzis, he didn't know from mezuzahs, he didn't know from tefillin, and Professor Rosenblum was invited to his house for a Suda Friday night. And that Friday night turned into, why don't you go to Crown Heights? I want you to meet someone. And he goes to Crown Heights, Professor Rosenblum does, and he meets the Rebbe. And a friendship in the 1940s developed for life. And I'm going to explain in a moment why I'm telling you this one story. That's all I'm going to share. Professor Rosenblum and the Rebbe became so close. Professor Rosenblum was eventually offered the head of the mathematics department at Columbia University. And he called the Rebbe and he said to the Rebbe, should I take the position? Should I stay in Missouri? I have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Maybe it's good for their chinuch, their education. I come to New York and I could live down the block. I could afford to live in Crown Heights. And the Rebbe said, yes and no. You should take the position in Columbia. But b'shum oifin nisht, you should not live in Crown Heights. He said, what? You don't like me? I love you, the Rebbe says. But I want you to stand for Torah in Columbia. I want you to be a mathematics professor who sat at the feet of Albert Einstein, who also stands at the feet of Har Sinai. And Kachava, he moved to Columbia and he lived on campus. And his son, in the late 60s, early 70s, was running around campus with his tzitzis flying. And there was a boy from Sweden, a Jewish boy, who in the 60s, 70s, who heard of tzitzis from Sweden? And he went to Professor Rosenblum's office and he said, I need to speak to you. Professor Rosenblum said, don't you know I only see students on Thursdays? He said, this is not about class, this is about your son. My son, what did my son do this time? No, your son did nothing wrong, but I see these fringes. What are these fringes? And he learned from the Shluchei Chabad, from the best. He said, you know what, why don't you come to my house Friday night? And maybe next week I'll take you to Crown Heights. I want you to meet someone. This Swedish student has been living in Muncie, New York, has been running a shoe store for over 50 years. A father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather of B'nai Torah. In fact, the Rebbe and Professor Rosenblum were so close, the Rebbe once said, you know, I know by a Mr., I call his wife a Mrs. The Rebbe, Mishum Tznius, would never call an Eshes Ish by her first name. I know by a rabbi, what do I call a rabbi's wife? A Rebbitzin. What do I call a professor's wife? The Rebbe would call Professor Rosenblum, and his wife, he would call her Professor Ka. Mind the Professor Ka. In fact, the Rebbe was such a pikeach. Again, I just want to share this one snippet of one life. When Columbia University hired this professor, Professor Rosenblum, we know today, we're very sophisticated, that when a university hires someone, they want prestige. They want him to record in journals and to come up with chidushim, novelties of thought. But Professor Rosenblum was a loner. Professor Rosenblum was a genius. And he would sit in his office alone working out mathematical equations. And the Rebbe was very concerned. So what did the Rebbe do? The Rebbe and Professor Rosenblum shared the same birthday. You'll excuse me, I'm not a Lubavitch Chassid. I believe it was Yud Aleph Nisan. Is that correct? Oh. Baruch Hashem. I passed the test. And every Yud Aleph Nisan, Professor Rosenblum would send the Rebbe a gift, a sefer, a menorah, whatever it may be. The Rebbe, when Professor Rosenblum became the head of the mathematics department at Columbia University, the Rebbe called up, picked up the phone. How often did the Rebbe do that? Picked up the phone and says, Professor Rosenblum, we share the same birthday. I don't need svarim, I have enough svarim. Every Yud Aleph Nisan, I want you to send me a chiddush in mathematics. Something novel in math. Something that is worthy to be printed in a journal. And not only did Professor Rosenblum oblige, for 50 years, sending the Rebbe a chiddush, a novelty in mathematics, but the Rebbe would send back his notes. Notes that I've seen. Notes that have been published in mathematical journals without the Rebbe's name, ad hayom hazeh, to this very day. And I want to tell you, he saved Professor Rosenblum's job. So why am I telling you this? Of all the millions of stories, there are two reasons. Number one, it shares with you the pikchus of the Rebbe, the shrewdness, the ava of the chibub, the love he had for every single Jew, not just at the beginning of their journey, but throughout their journey. But I share this story for another reason. When I was introduced so beautifully, it was mentioned that I am probably the rabbi of the closest shul to the Oyel on Francis Lewis Boulevard. Does anybody know who Francis Lewis was? Who was Francis Lewis? Francis Lewis was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Our freedom came from Francis Lewis. Let me ask you a question. For the B'nai Torah in the room, Ezahu ben Chorin, Halomedas HaTorah, the halachic Jew, the Torah Jew. Francis Lewis gave us our physical independence. But tzaddikim, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, gave so many their ruchnius freedom, their spiritual freedom. But that's not the only reason why I'm sharing this story. How do I know this story? Professor Rosenblum's son, Lee Rosenblum, is a member of our shul 2.5 miles down the block. He was the boy with the tzitzis running down the block of Columbia University. And I share this story for another reason. You know, I grew up, I'm not Chabad. But I grew up with Chabad. I actually knew Professor Rosenblum. I remember Professor Rosenblum. His son is in my shul now. His daughter was in my father's shul. Professor Rosenblum, I remember him as an old man with a beard. He had glasses that were so thick, they looked like they came out of a Hollywood prop department. And I went to Yeshiva Eitz Chaim in Toronto, which was not a Chabad yeshiva, but the best rebbeim I ever had were Chabad. Rabbi Hachler, Rabbi Glukowski, Zechron Levracha, Tzadikim Yesharim, who taught boys of all stripes how to live their life. And then I went on to yeshiva and I moved to Lakewood. I moved to Buffalo to become a rabbi, and Rabbi Gurari and Rabbi Greenberg. Tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. And then I got a job in Queens. I thought I was done with Lubavitch. I called up the shul. I said, what street is the shul on? They said, Francis Lewis Boulevard. Gewalt. But it's a tremendous chus. I want you to know, first of all, Rabbi Abba Refson, who I believe was the first Rav in the oil, is he still here? Rabbi Abba Refson used to have an apartment by our shul before my time. We have a very close kesher, not just personally, but my shul. And kemat every Shabbos, someone from the oil comes to our shul. I give a shir on the parsha. At the end of the shir, they get up, they speak on the parsha. It's unbelievable. Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah, so many of the young light and the bacharim, the young married and the students come to our shul to dancen machlebedik, and it's unbelievable. We have so much hakaras hatov. But I don't just want to speak about Francis Lewis or Professor Rosenblum. I want to conclude with two things. I want to tell you all something. This just happened today. I was thinking about what I'm going to speak about today. I was driving I have 4 daughters, Kainahara, and a son. My son is 6 years old. I'm driving him to Yeshiva Katana of Queens. And he says from the back seat, he's 5, 6 years old, and he says, what is a malach? How do you explain to a 6-year-old what a malach is? I said, a malach is an angel, thinking that would quiet him. What's an angel? And it reminded me, I want to just end with this. It reminded me of a Gemara in Chagiga. The Gemara in Chagiga says, if you want to know who should be your Rebbe, who should you choose as a Rebbe? Malach Hashem Tzavakos. They have to be a Malach. So my son says to me, do tzaddikim see Malachim? I said, probably. He said, well, Tati, you're a Malach, you're a tzaddik, you could see Malach. He's too young to recognize I'm not a tzaddik. And it's taka akash on the Gemara. If we're only supposed to have a Rebbe who's a tzaddik, who's a Malach, and we don't have the ability to see Malachim, how do we choose a Rebbe? So I once heard a pshat from Elia Svei, the late Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva of Philadelphia. There's a Medrash Rabbah and Bereshis Rabbah, Perek Yud, an unbelievable Medrash we all know. Everybody here knows that Medrash. That every blade of grass has what? A malach. And what does the malach say to the blade of grass? Grow, grow. So we began with our tzaddikim, and you look at them and you recognize how great they are. But there are tzaddikim who look at you and you recognize how great you could be. When you meet someone, when you look at them, they galvanize you to say to yourself, grow, grow. That's the malach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and through the Divrei Chazal, were telling us to choose as our Rebbe, who's a malach Hashem tzavakos. So let me just end. I don't want to just speak tonight. I speak often, like many Rabbanim here. I want everybody here, it's the 27th yahrtzeit of the Rebbe. 27, I was looking in the Maharal. I actually looked up in the Maharal. What does he say about 27? Nothing. He says something about 28. He says something about 26. Nothing about 27. But then I thought, 27 is Zoch. Shemin, Zayis, Zoch. Purity, Tahara. So I hope everybody here tonight tonight takes upon themselves something, whether it's being Maver Sedra, learning the Parsha every week, Daf Hayomi, learning the Sichas of the Rebbe, I don't care what it is, between man and man, between man and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the schus of the Rebbe who believed in you, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe in ourselves. Bizchuso, in his merit. And in that merit, may we all be zocha to the day of Tchias HaMesim, when we will be zocha to the Shemen Zayis, Zoch. May it be b'mheira b'yameinu.
Don't get scared. I'm not your next speaker. I remember an address, 501 West 120th Street. That's the address of Dr. Rosenblum. At Yechidus, Rabbi, the Rebbe spoke to me about Rivel. That was her name. You know where she's buried? Right outside of the Rebbe's Eihel. The Rebbe had a brother, a younger brother, who was a mathematician. And he left some mathematical papers. By a Verbringen, there's a tape. The Rebbe asked Dr. Rosenblum that he wants to give him the papers, and he wants him to look over and publish those papers. You call him Dr. Rosenblum, we called him Pesach Betzalel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbis Taub and Butman. For a non-card carrying Lubavitcher, you did pretty well, Rabbi. The prophet Yeshaya, Isaiah, teaches us that V'hoyu einecha royes esmerecha. In addition to learning, performing mitzvahs, there is something very special and powerful about gazing at the countenance of a tzaddik. Incredible power. We have prepared for you tonight a very special video of the Rebbe. When you invite people to watch a video or a movie, you normally say, sit back and relax. But when watching a video of the Rebbe, it's sit back and be energized to rise even higher and higher. At the conclusion of the video, we want to remind everyone to make a bracha achreina, the after blessing, after which you'll have the opportunity to visit the Ohel. Again, we're here to help you with the notes, the panim, etc. Thank you all very much.
May you continue to do all the wonderful work you do.
I'm not satisfied that only continuing. It must be to increase.
Well, we'll be satisfied if you continue.
No,
not only for the...
I'm not satisfied. Not only about me, but not about you also. You continue always the same thing, which is when every living thing must grow. I have read your article in this the dogmatic lesson not to be satisfied. This demands much more from everyone, including yourself and myself. And be satisfied. But this is make it double.
You taught us one thing, never to be satisfied, so we never will be. Just lead us and be well and healthy.
And don't let affect your health, but you're not satisfied.
That a human constitution is like an engine. If you overdo it, you can burn it up, but if you underdo it, it gets sluggish. So I try to work it to the best efficiency according to the way you told me many years ago.
Yeah, God Almighty bless you to have more strength and to be even more. Es darf sein der Meiling Bakede. Darf machen noch mehr Lichtigkeit und noch mehr Klore. Die Lichtigkeit von Teilu mit Zwiseo. A good beginning. And the teacher will do twice a month. Nicht weiter können, wir kriegen, was wir da in
I'm trying.
Not only your best, but much more. Der Ruchni, Toren ist eigentlich so mehr Bechelke. Soll sich nicht werden befriedigt, wie die Sachen, was getan und ergräbt. Das war so mehr Bechelke, sehr eine große Sache. Aber wenn du gehst für Jannen und Teilen, ist es selber auch nur bei Aristotle. And if you can add something else, I'll be very happy. God will not bless you to go from strength to strength, to do all possible that the business will grow, budget will grow, and your activities will also grow. יש לי מונה רייצה מסיים, יש לי מסיים, רייצה דלת נהיה, אז זה זון זך nicht begnugene, mit der Grechungen von Bisitzne und Verlange, bei den Schluchen dort, bei den Tues dort, nehmen alle gute Sachen. Und die Frau bei den Schluchen von Balhaibula mit London noch mehr. Und zustellen sie der alle Möglichkeiten als Konensonnen der. Und dessen der nächsten der Hele.
Thank God, the Jewish house has gone from strength to strength. We help a lot of people. We help myself, including myself. We helped in therapy, in family therapy. We helped in all the Jewish schools. And Rabbi Wolfson here has done a wonderful job.
Only with the help of Anthony and brother. Wasn't able to
Demand from him twice as much. And he'll demand from you twice as much. And God will not give you twice as much in his blessing.
One of the building committee for the new Chabad house in Hartford. The rabbi's open, beautiful, and he's been very much responsible for it.
God will not bless you not to be satisfied by your own Chabad house. But you add the second door and after that the third door. And to do all these things in good health, in good parnassus. I hope the God Almighty will provide you with additional donors and you'll use together with your partners is the best efficient way to spread Yiddishkeit as soon as possible because the Mashiach is coming soon.
You know that we're now providing from the UJA Federation campaign $250,000 a year to the Lubavitch school system, which is very important. This is new development. It's wonderful.
And you expect me to be satisfied about the quarter?
I'm not satisfied either.
We are not satisfied.
If you were satisfied, I'd be worried.
You share with me. You have no reason to be worried at all.
Many years. Nice to see you again.
I'll be very happy when you add to your activities to spread the Yiddishkeit. Wenn dort weten, dass so much time I lost spoken with you about good news of spreading leadership.
Yes.
Especially in the realm of the Jewish education.
You're amazing. To remember that it's 19 years ago. 19 years ago. That's right.
What will be the benefits of the community that I am
We'll each try to do our best. That's all we can do.
I think that the cash it in.
Yeah.
You'll help me.
Yes, I'll try.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask just one for my brother, who had absolutely no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit at all. His name is Meir ben Eta. Absolutely no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit. Except
He was born a Jew. That means he's not only shaykhs to Yiddishkeit, he is a Jew, and that is his essence. You must only reveal it by removing the dirt or the shame that is covering it up. And that depends on his relatives, and especially brother or sister-in-law. That means you.
When he said to me to put on tefillin, never miss a day. I'm proud to tell you I've never missed a day. And I hope I'll never miss a day. My son is putting on tefillin too now.
Yeah, use it in good health, in good prognosis, and use it also for the influence. את מדליקה בשבת. אבל תראה שכל החברות שלו יעשו גם כן. That from strength to strength and live with the mitzvahs and be a good influence on all the people around you.
Yeah, God Almighty bless you for being happy and for make happy all the Jews around you.
Por